There's no way to say this in a nice way, so I'm just going to come out with it. Canada has an immigration problem. Let's get into it.
Oh, yeah!
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. I hope you guys are getting ready for your weekends as we head into the last week before Christmas. I hope you guys have got all your shopping done and you're getting excited for what's coming down, what's coming down the tube, so to speak, in terms of holidays. Hopefully, people can find a way to have a nice and happy holiday this year if you're celebrating Christmas or if you're celebrating something else. Um, I have concerns. I have concerns for people. People are finding it very tough to be able to afford anything. When it comes to Christmas dinners, I know friends who are actually going to other friends and they're doing a potluck because they simply can't afford to do Christmas dinner on their own. My wife and I talked multiple times about what our plans were going to be for Christmas, and fortunate for us, other family have decided they're going to do things and they've opened their doors. Not to say that we wouldn't have been able to afford Christmas, but you start debating the costs of, do we really want to make a $500 meal for four people in a house? Um, this is the reality that we're living in, and this is the way that life is heading. But for most, they don't even have the luxury of debating what they're going to do for Christmas dinner, let alone where they're going to live. And we're seeing an ongoing problem in Canada, one that has been reported on now just recently in Calgary, but also attached to other very large metropolitan cities like Toronto. And we're going to get into that later on in this video. But I wanted to start with this article that was sent to me by, well, my wife. She's good at digging up news, and she usually checks her sites on her way to work, and she always tries to send me something she finds interesting. But this is actually linked to another article that we're going to get into as to part of the problem. But CBC, which again, they're Looney Tunes, but they're reporting on the face of homelessness changing according to Calgary frontline workers. Now, homelessness is a big problem across the country. You see cities where the average rent is over $3,000 a month. People's mortgages are over $3,000 a month. There's a lot of people who purchased their homes in 2018, 2019 that are coming up for mortgage renewals that with the increased interest rates, they're not going to be able to afford to pay their mortgage payments. I recently seen Pierre Poilievre talking about a man in Toronto, evidently, who is working multiple jobs in order to just pay $3,500 a month in his mortgage payment, half of which goes to just the interest, and they can't afford to live. And keep in mind that $3,500 a month, or I believe it was even closer to 5,000. It might have been higher to 5,000, but it's between 3,500 to 5,000 for a townhome in the Toronto area. This gentleman is working nonstop, 16 hours plus a day, just for his family to basically pay their bills and be broke at the end of it. This is unacceptable in Canada. This is a huge problem. And while we talk about pandemics that lowered our dollar value, while we talk about ruthless government spending that's lowered our dollar value, one thing that's not being discussed, aside from people like Maxime Bernier, is the immigration problem that we have in this country. Anytime a country is doing poorly in terms of its GDP, in terms of its dollar value or inflation, you have to question the validity of bringing people in from other parts of the world. I've always said that Canada has so much space. Pierre Poilievre has touched about that when he talks about how much of our land we actually use in this country versus open space. And yeah, we do have open space, but the problem is nothing's being built. And while Justin Trudeau has gone back to wartime building of homes for cheap homes for people to be quick builds, that's not the answer. The biggest problem of all is that we've left the door wide open. Canada not only brings in countless immigrants throughout the year of people coming here for a better life, but we've also taken in hundreds of thousands of people illegally, which, if you look at crossings like Roxham Road, have come into the country and they're put up in hotels at the taxpayers' dime before they have their immigration hearings and before they plead asylum, and they are free and welcome to stay in the country. And there's really no requirements when it comes to these folks. And I know this is a bit of a ramble, but I want to make sure all the bases are covered. We've seen students who are posting YouTube videos we've touched about on this channel before on how to scam the food banks and get free food, even though they're required to have so much money in order to survive before they come here for schooling. But now we're starting to see it affect cities, where we're seeing tent cities form up. We've talked about even armed forces employees who are living in their cars because they can't afford rent. And now, of course, this article from the CBC mentioning that the face of homelessness is changing. And this was alarming because, again, I've touched on the homelessness issues in Calgary. Right now, and recorded, they say recorded and documented wise, we're sitting at roughly 3,500 homeless people. I think that's probably closer to double that rate based on the current living conditions that we have. But we're going to get into this article and then I'm going to talk about where that links up. So this is just a brief summary of what's happening in Calgary, but the bigger picture is elsewhere. Calgary outreach worker Chaz Smith and his team of volunteers have been distributing food, clothes, and referrals for services to the city's unhoused for 9 years. The founder of Be the Change YYC, which I believe is an NGO, says most of those facing homelessness during this time have been Caucasian or Indigenous. These days, he's noticing more newcomer faces. It's easy to spot newcomers because the accent, the language barrier are very real. I feel so bad. Folks are coming here from all over and then they find that they can't afford any housing, said Smith. He shares a story about a woman from Pakistan he met last week on the downtown C train platform who was crying because she had nowhere to go. Smith said they eventually got her to a safe place where she could receive some help. He's now hoping to raise more awareness so that more immediate housing solutions can be provided for newcomers, immigrants, and refugees who struggle with language barriers, no support systems, and no understanding of how to navigate the system. I think that it's sad that we've sold sort of like this Canadian dream and we're not able to fulfill our obligation to these folks, said Smith. Well, the problem there, and something that the CBC is virtue signaling on that they're not covering or asking Smith, is how can we afford to take in immigrants when we can't even afford to take care of ourselves? That's always the biggest problem. And that's again why I find it alarming that candidates like Pierre Poilievre, while people have said before in other videos, look, he's going to torpedo his career if he talks about this. I think we need more, you know, firm firm action from our representatives to say, look, we don't like saying this. It's the same as I say on this video. I don't want to say people can't come here or people can't have a better life, but we need to take care of our country first. We need to fix our problems first. And once those are done, we should be happy to bring people in and happy to provide jobs and happy to provide people with a better way of living, especially when they're seeking asylum from war-torn countries. However, the biggest problem here isn't the language barrier. The problem here is that we're in a severe recession with overinflated prices, higher interest rates than any time in the last 40 years. We have a government that doesn't seem to acknowledge or care about how much these refugees or immigrants costs Canadian citizens, and we've seen that across the country again as tent cities explode in towns. As we see people living in their cars, we've seen people leaving the country. We've seen multiple news articles talking about people that have come here with money to try and find a better life that are actually leaving and going back to where they came from simply because Canada is not what they were promised or told. Now, when it comes to people coming here and having nothing and not being able to find anywhere to go, well, these are people, again, who come from other parts of the world that maybe don't see winter or don't see cold seasons. And I can't imagine how much of a struggle that's going to be in places like Calgary, where in the middle of January or early February, you could see temperatures fall as low as minus 35 Celsius overnight, and people would possibly and probably will freeze to death. I think they're going to have a massive blow up this year. And this is where I keep saying, I think that as we go into 2024, things are going to get worse, far worse before they get better. I think early 2024, we're going to start to see a little bit of a reality check into what all of this mass immigration is doing. But here we go with the immigration waves, as Kelly Ernst, to the Center of Newcomers, says between the sustained influx of immigrants and refugees over the past couple of years and the rising cost of living and lack of affordable housing, newcomers are struggling to find housing in Calgary now more than ever. People will literally arrive at our center with suitcases and say, I need a place to live. I hate to sound cruel. Again, that's not our problem. He says that the center offers a diversion program aimed at keeping people off the streets, but he says it's been oversubscribed this year and the center is at risk of running out of funds ahead of schedule. So, again, these are where I talk about NGOs, non government organizations, and how I believe, again, as I run for mayor for Calgary, things like this need to be eliminated and taken out, and those monies need to be dispersed into doing things like lowering business tax, lowering people's property taxes so that people that are currently in this city that contribute um, to the growth of our city and to our economy are given the benefits until we can start to make things better. When you see people giving out free housing, and it's not free, I don't want to say it in that sense, but in the semantic of free housing, it's a lot of money wasted for people that, again, if you're going to come to a country, you should have to show I can afford to be here, I have a job, I have income, and I have savings in order to come to the country to find somewhere suitable to live. If I, as a Canadian, wanted to migrate to the United States tomorrow, I would have to show those things. I would have to show that I not only have a job, but that I have a visa, that I have approval and sponsorship from a company, and I would also have to show that I've either sold my house and have money in order to acquire a property or enough to get by and pay my rent while living within the United States. And then, if I'm vetted and cleared for that process, only then can I move forward. I'm not allowed to simply arrive with my bags and drop them and say, find me somewhere to live. Uh, this is a huge problem. And again, Calgary is lower on the scale. Our numbers are up significantly, they said. He says Calgary is also becoming a magnet for recently arrived immigrants who found life in Toronto or Vancouver too expensive. And we're going to get into that. We can't say that this is really one particular refugee wave or one particular immigration wave that is hitting us. It's coming from all sorts of angles. Now, again, this is from the CBC, so of course it's dumbed down to make it sound like, oh, we just don't know what's happening. Well, I can tell you what's happening because this article from Brian Lilly talks about Olivia Chow saying that the city of Toronto is broke but still wants to rename Dundas Street. And this, of course, shows the biggest problem that we're facing when it comes to this immigration problem, and it's woke corrupt government officials, whether they're mayors, whether they're premiers, whether they're the federal government, who are spending money in stupid places. And again, this is where I refer to things like non government organizations or NGOs, is that they'd rather rename streets than solve part of their problem. Which, again, the money that they could get won't solve their problem. They need to be petitioning to the government to close our borders. The city's coffers may be empty, and Mayor Olivia Chow may be begging the federal government for a bailout, but that doesn't mean we won't spend millions to rename Dundas Street. Sorry, excuse me. Originally pegged at $6 million and then $8.6 million and now $12.7 million just in city costs, the price to rename Dundas Street has ballooned. For the city, there is renaming of the street, the changing of the street signs, or blades, as the city calls them, and a lot of administrative work. The $12.7 million cost to rename the street doesn't include the cost to residents or businesses who will have to change signage, promotional materials, legal contracts, and more. Henry Dundas was a Scottish politician who held enormous sway in the British Parliament in the late 1700s and 1800s. The claim against Dundas is that he delayed the abolition of slavery because he amended a bill to make the abolition, gradual rather than immediate. The reality is, without the amendment from Dundas, what was proposed would have not passed. Blaming Dundas for keeping slavery alive is a form of historical illiteracy because it's not true. But Olivia Chow pushes the false narrative as part of her agenda because, again, they'd rather virtue signal and spend our tax dollars doing nonsense than actually facing their actual problems. Before stating her continued support for renaming the streets, Chow detailed how destitute the city was without a bailout of federal cash. She said the city cannot afford to run their shelter programs or replace subway cars without federal support. Every night the shelters are full. More than 200 people are turned away, and at least half of them are refugees. Now, again, this is where we have a problem with immigration. So the problem isn't that Toronto is underfunded, because, again, millions of dollars are slated. She doesn't want to pull back on that and say, this is something we'd like to do, but unfortunately, money's tight. We can't do those things right now. This is what you get when you elect NDP mayors. This is what you get when you elect liberal federal governments, is people who are uneducated, who worry about their own agendas, and they worry about virtue signaling and their ESG scores and their WEF agendas, and they worry about how they look online and how they're lining their friends' pockets rather than what's necessary in order for people to be able to live. But the refugee part is where this hits on the head. Our shelter costs have skyrocketed, And we've asked the federal government to support us, to help us pay the bills. Well, why is it the federal government's job? We're talking about 200 refugees in Toronto every night, or half of those, so at least 100 that are turned away. Why aren't we deporting them? Why aren't we saying Canada's closed? It's a valid request, just as a request for federal government to help pay for subway cars is valid. But if you're asking for other levels of government to bail you out, you might not want to take, or you might want to make sure that you're watching how you spend your own dollars. No one who has looked honestly at the historical record would think that in a time of financial crisis, the real priority of the city of Toronto was spending $13 million to rename streets. Now, again, they're talking about the history of renaming Dundas. Um, There were 12 streets identified in Toronto named after slave owners, and even a street named for former Liberal Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier was deemed to be in need of renaming. And they talk about policies, they talk about Dundas and money. Again, there's no point in going back and forth. If you can't clean the streets or pick up garbage properly and run the transit system to an acceptable standard, is this what the city should be spending money on? Councillor Chris Moy said on Wednesday the renaming of Young Dundas Square would be paid for by his own community benefits fund. The renaming of Dundas Station to be named Toronto Metropolitan University Station will see $1.5 million price tag paid for by TMU. Municipal taxpayers won't pay for renaming Dundas Square, but taxpayers in general will still foot the bill. There's no way for the city to rename Dundas without a massive cost. If the city had the money, that would be one thing. But when they are broke, it makes no sense. Unless, of course, the reason is to spend 12.7 to send a virtue signal from City Hall. That's not worth the cost. So again, what Brian Lilly's laying out there is more the history of Dundas Street. But what they're not touching on again is the problem is immigration. The problem is reckless spending. We've seen it in Calgary. I've covered before woke failed mayor Jyoti Gondek and her $2.5 million statue that's going in at a convention center while she just raised property taxes. Again, my property taxes have gone up $75 a month simply because the city has a spending problem. One of my campaign um, one of my campaign promises, or one of the reasons that I even chose to run for mayor, was I said the cities, including Toronto, including Vancouver, and other cities, have a spending problem. I run my house like a fine oiled machine. There's things that when you look in my background and you say, hey, he's got arcades, he's got toys, he's got all these things. Guess what? I've never spent a single dime out of our family's communal bank account in order to purchase these things. I've tried to be smart about it and say, these are things that I would like. There are times where I'd like to go on a vacation, or I would like to buy a new car, or have some fun with some money, or go out of town for a weekend. Well, the reality is sometimes you have to look at the old account and say, I just can't afford it. So while it would be nice, we're going to put that on the back burner. And much like Pierre Poilievre's, for every dollar spent, we have to find a dollar in savings. That's how I would push to run a city, is that structures are nice, artwork is nice, new trains are nice, you know, things that raises for city council would be nice too. However, we have to look at the money that's getting sucked up by NGOs. We have to look at the money that's being pushed towards virtue signaling and silly policies. And we have to start saying we can't afford to do these things. We're bleeding ourselves dry, and we have to be responsible. The bottom line is that Canada en masse has an immigration problem, and I don't see a single politician other than Maxime Bernier, who can't even get his seat, I might add, taking issue with it. I don't see them talking about this. And much like our video from yesterday, where I say I worry about guys like Pierre who aren't really calling for arrests when it comes to scandals, is this going to be more of what we see? Again, I'm not saying Pierre is going to be Trudeau 2.0, but what I'm suggesting is that if we don't start hearing the real points from these governments, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Again, we're aimed to bring in, I believe it's somewhere around 1.7 or 2 million immigrants within the next 3 years into this country. That's a lot of people. That, again, if we're already turning away hundreds from homeless shelters, what's it going to look like in 3 years? When a year and a half of those is still what Justin Trudeau has left in office. Again, it's been a longer video. I apologize for my rants. Again, folks, I try to make these not only news covering, but opinion related so that everybody can understand where I'm coming from with this and maybe form their own opinions. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Do you agree that Canada has a massive immigration problem? Do you agree that more politicians should be talking about it? I understand what that can mean to Pierre's campaign, but I think something needs to be said. Let me know what you guys think down below. If it's your first time here, hopefully this video has earned your subscription. Make sure, as you're hitting that button, to turn on your bell for notifications. Join us live here on the channel every Sunday night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time as we do our weekly wrap and go over everything that's happened in the past week, everything coming up in the week ahead, and a little bit of back and forth with the community. It's always great seeing you guys there. I love chatting with you guys outside of making these videos, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you join us there this Sunday night at 6:30 p.m. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and enjoyed this video. I'll catch you on the next one.